Lawyers, what's the worst client you've ever had to work for? Had a court-appointed client accused of communicating threats over the phone. He's basically a kid with no criminal record or anything, so we plan on an easy deferred deal to avoid any risks related to trial. Just do some community service, pay court costs and the fee, and don't get in trouble for a year and the charges are dropped. Day of court, his mom and stepdad are there with him. Stepdad is particularly opposed to the deal. Demands we go to trial. Subpoena the former girlfriend of my client / daughter of the victim who is living in another state. Client is now following stepdad without question. I say fine, if the judge will grant a continuance. Judge doesn't because victim has trouble getting to court. Stepdad refuses to accept this. Tells me to take it to trial. To get it continued. I explain I'm not a miracle worker. I hadn't prepared for going to trial or subpoenaing witnesses since we had planned on a deferred deal. At this point, he's getting real close to me and bordering on belligerent and threatening me / the court. I'm very not comfortable with this and decide to try to withdraw because of the demand for the impossible / illegal and because it might get a continuance. It's denied because they don't want to continue. So stepdad starts saying they'll go hire another attorney. Eventually, stepdad is told to leave as we are trying to work out what we are going to do, or if they can hire another attorney. No one's going to take it on such short notice, and no one's going to somehow do the impossible. But I'm fine sitting in the back room waiting for them to call and be to other offices while I bill the state for being forced to wait around. I'm extremely frustrated with client at this point because he's basically parroting what his idiot stepdad said and refusing to accept the situation or my advice. Nearing the end of the session, I'm told to go get my client to proceed. So I walk out to find him in the lobby. Guess who's back? Stepdad. And he's drunk. Now client and stepdad are both in cuffs to see if they should be held in contempt. Stepdad is held in contempt, sentenced to a week in jail. Managed to still get the deferred deal despite this. But after this is done, and I talk with client alone, it's clear client is extremely sheltered and dumb. Basically incapable of caring for himself because his parents have never let him learn anything, like their own fucking phone number. I'm honestly surprised our first interview didn't involve them somehow. A year later, I'm pleasantly surprised he's actually managed to comply with the deal and has gotten away from his parents. But his grandmother, with whom he's presumably now living, is not a grand improvement. Still very controlling and refusing to accept blame and whatnot. Girl was charged with simple assault. Not a big deal, but she could face a year in county. I got the charges completely dropped. She called me later and told me I sucked as an attorney and didn't know what I was doing. Confused, I asked her if she understood she was completely off the hook. She understood, but thought I sucked because I didn't get the other person convicted. Rather than explain the difference between defense and prosecution to a dumbass, I just hung up the phone. Had a client who went to Walmart and drank 2 bottles of wine off the shelf while also stealing small items throughout the store over the course of 2 hours. Then tried to fight the security guard who outweighed her by 150 pounds when she tried to leave. Whole thing was on video. She then made me go to trial. About 90% of the trial was the tape of her drunken Walmart shenanigans. Jury deliberated for about 3 minutes before announcing the conviction. My uncle told me this. He's the lawyer. So apparently this guy was going to prison for attempted murder and drunk driving. If you're wondering how they mix his defense says it all, this was what he said to my uncle. One night I was at a party with his friends, everyone was drunk then. When it was over he got in his car to drive home. On the way home I get pulled over by a police officer and he says get out the car and I didn't want, I mean it's my car. The policeman had probably been having bullcrap all day, so the policeman just tells me to get out again before just giving up. Then I just got up and beat the crap out of him. Not me but my mom. So she's a bankruptcy lawyer and had this client who wanted some sort of like bill break where she doesn't have to pay for things for a while for coronavirus. The client had a job at Amazon, still went to work and steady pay. My mom didn't know why she wanted this and needed it granted by a judge, but it wouldn't pass without a basis. So my mom kept asking, but why? And this lady kept saying stuff like, I'm afraid I might get coronavirus and I don't need to tell you, and it's none of your business. This lady gets frustrated with my mom and says, fine, I'll just go to people against her in case S office. My mom tells her go ahead, they're against you. Also he's not my boss, and the lady hangs up. It's often more fun to be the other side, finding the idiots. I'm not a lawyer, but I've worked in the field. Best one I know of was a guy claiming neck/back/shoulder injury from a car accident. He claims that his wife had to provide care 24 hours a day and should be compensated as well. This includes, according to him, dates that we could prove she was out of state, dates she was employed elsewhere, and the day she gave birth to their child, and the weeks before and after. Also, we had video/pictures from various social media of him doing all kinds of things he claimed to be incapable of. Can't lift his right arm past the shoulder, or rotate his head to look up. Got pictures of him welding the underbody of a car on a rack above his head. Can't lift more than 25 pounds. Video of him tossing his daughter in the air. The best though was when he arrived at a deposition. He shows up alone, though he claims he can't drive, jogs across the street to a party store, then returns to the car, puts on a neck brace and some contraption for his back, grabs his cane and heads into the office. I was standing out front chatting with our investigator. About 30 feet from the entrance he notices us. The investigator was still shooting pictures. He eventually lost, but not before 3 different lawyers quit on him. Mother came in for a med mal case for her new baby. She claimed she told her doctors what she wanted done. Ironically, it was the Captain Hindsight perfect thing to do, and claimed they did not listen. Baby was born emergency C-section for heart problems. Had to be resuscitated, and has an intellectual disability as a result. Turns out the mom was lying. She was smoking a pack a day during the pregnancy, and had done pretty hard drugs in the timeline of the pregnancy. She lied about that. But the medical records don't. I'm not a lawyer yet, I've got 1 more year. But I have seen my fair share of stupid clients. One of my personal favorites was a client that my boss at the time was defending on a weed possession charge, intent to distribute level. The near daily conversations of my boss telling him he can't smoke weed outside the front door of the office and then come in for a meeting was amusing to say the least. I do personal injury law on the plaintiff's side. My best story involves someone else's client who I was deposing. In this case, I was deposing this guy who caused a car crash. Guy worked for a car dealership and was driving a company car. He swerved over 2 lanes of traffic on a highway into another car in an intersection and sent that car flying into my client's vehicle that was stopped at a red light. My client was trapped in his car until the jaws of life pulled him out. Anyways, so I'm quizzing this guy and ask him if he had taken any drugs that day. He said no. I said how about the day before? He said no. I said how about in the last week? He said nope, no way. I then slide over to him a copy of the drug test his employer had him take, which showed him testing positive for methamphetamine and amphetamine. I ask him why he tested positive for these drugs if he hadn't ever taken them. His eyes got really wide and he said, well, I never would have taken the test if I had known I was going to test positive. Case settled pretty quickly after that. I do white collar, so most clients are big companies. However, one moment stands out. It was an international tax case about a company's transfer pricing arrangement. During discovery we found a non-privileged email with the subject matter transfer pricing, which began with the words I still remember verbatim. Make sure to delete this email as it would be a terrible trail for the IRS to follow. We had produced 10 copies of the email including a scan of a paper version, because someone had printed it out and put it in their files. Not a lawyer, but had one as a client in my old job. Very nice guy. He defended corporations. The worst case of his career, he was defending an RV company. Why? Buyer purchased an RV with cruise control, a relatively new feature at the time. Buyer then set the cruise control and went to the back to use the bathroom while driving down the highway. You can guess what happened. RV crashed. Buyer was badly injured. Buyer ended up winning the case because the owner's manual did not sufficiently explain that cruise control not equal self-driving vehicle. Note that this was long before self-driving technology was remotely plausible. One guy confessed on arrest, stated, "I only shot him because he needed to get shot," signed the Miranda waiver, and agreed to talk. How can they arrest me for beating my own kids? They're mine. A guy who made his own driver's license and license plate. He fired me. A guy who wanted to start a restaurant, borrowed $500,000, never opened the restaurant, gets sued by the landlord for return of the premises and damages, shows up on trial date with a phone message written on a slip of paper, claiming that someone is willing to loan him $300,000. I told him he either has to have a relationship with reality or accept that terrible things are going to continue happening. I work in patent law. Had an elderly guy come in with tons and tons of family, which is super weird because he wanted to patent several items. These items were going to make him enough money that he could retire and leave money for his family. He had several items. They were all commonly known items found for $5 at any hardware store. One was just a bungee cord he had made. He was so proud of them when he showed me, really beaming. I knew instantly this was absurd, but went through the process of taking notes and told him I would get back to him with a report. Some stories from an old magazine. A lawyer attests that, while defending a client in a domestic matter, the plaintiff's expert testified that the defendant had a low IQ. Later his client balked at the testimony. "It's not true," the client said, pointing out his IQ was 20/20 with corrective lenses. One lawyer swears that a Los Angeles Superior Court judge was able to keep a straight face when he asked a petitioner, "Why do you want to change your name, Mr. Snotty?" One public defender sends us a court transcript in which a prostitute listed a nearby motel as her business address. In a similar vein, a judge tells us a juror told her during voir dire that her boyfriend was convicted of aiding and abetting prostitution. Two attorneys were on hand when a topless dancer described her routines and what she charged for them. "Have you always charged the same thing for these services?" the prosecutor asked. "No," replied the dancer. "All of us got together recently and reduced our prices by $5 to help the war effort." A defendant was charged with stealing hogs, and after an exemplary defense, the jury foreman announced the verdict. "We the jury acquit the defendant." With a smile on his face, the defendant tapped his defender on the shoulder and asked, "Does this mean I can keep the hogs?" I had a criminal client who was picked up on a valid arrest warrant. He swore the police had no reason to arrest him, so we ran a records check and saw that the arresting officer had checked on the warrant status less than 48 hours before the arrest. So he knew there was a warrant. During the arrest, they searched him and found drugs. Here's the dumb part. During the course of the case, despite the state having him dead to rights on the arrest and the drug charges, he refused 5 different plea offers. We obviously lost at trial. I miraculously convinced the judge not to give him any jail, despite having an abhorrent criminal record. He called me a few weeks later, after getting a probation violation, and swore up and down that the state never made any plea offers to him. A flat out lie. We had lengthy conversations about the offers. Then he sent a letter to me and the prosecutor threatening to grieve us. I never heard from him again.